Scum like you belongs in cages, not my courtroom. Judge Halden Price let the insult breathe, eyes locked on Malik Rowe like he was something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. The verdict is in, he said, tapping the paper with a slow, satisfied finger. You did what your kind always does. Lash out, then hide behind excuses. The cuffs around Malik's wrists bit every time he shifted, but he forced himself to stand still. Price leaned closer, voice dropping into something almost intimate. No mercy. No second chances. I'm not releasing a threat back into decent society. He lifted the gavel, savoring the moment, and behind him, the courtroom doors were seconds from opening for the one man whose authority could erase that bench with a single word. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The morning sun slanted through the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden benches. Malik Rowe sat perfectly straight at the defense table, his school uniform pressed and neat despite his sweating palms. Next to him, Tessa Lang arranged papers with precise movements, but Malik could see the tension in her jaw. Behind them in the gallery, his grandmother Evelyn's fingers worked the edges of her church handkerchief, the same one she'd carried every Sunday for as long as he could remember. The cotton was nearly transparent at the corners from years of worry. D.A. Kendra Voss rose from her seat, smoothing her blazer as she approached the jury. Her heels clicked against the floor like a metronome counting down the moments of Malik's freedom. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying that perfect note of concerned authority, "this case isn't about what the defense wants you to believe. This isn't about a teenager who claims he was helping. This is about public safety. This is about protecting our community from violent offenders who hide behind excuses." Malik's stomach clenched. He remembered the truth of that night, the sound of fists hitting flesh, the victim's muffled cries from behind the grocery store. He'd been walking home from his evening shift, fixing phones at the repair shop when he heard it. Anyone would have helped. Anyone should have helped. Voss continued, gesturing toward Malik without looking at him. "The defendant wants you to see a child, but look closer. Look at the choices he made. Look at the violence he brought to that parking lot. A man was severely injured, and not by accident." From his position along the aisle, Deputy Soren Bale watched with barely concealed satisfaction. His thumbs hooked into his belt, fingers drumming near his badge. Malik remembered those hands shoving him into the patrol car, remembered Bale's whispered, "Shouldn't have played hero, boy," as the cuffs bit into his wrists. "The prosecution has shown you," Voss continued, "through witness testimony and physical evidence, that the defendant's actions were not those of a good Samaritan. They were the calculated moves of someone who saw an opportunity for violence and took it." Malik glanced at the jury box. 12 faces studied their hands, their notepads, the floor. Anywhere but at him. He recognized that avoidance. It was the same look people got when they crossed the street to avoid him, even in his school uniform. Tessa Lang leaned close, her voice barely a whisper. The security footage would have shown everything. Clear as day, but somehow it's just gone. Her fingers tightened on her legal pad. And Marcus, he saw the whole thing. Yesterday he could describe every detail. Today he couldn't recall basic facts about what happened. The memory of that night flashed through Malik's mind with crystal clarity. The victim had been curled on the ground, trying to protect his head. Malik had stepped between them, hands raised. "Hey!" he'd shouted. "Stop!" There had been a scuffle, but he'd been pulling the attacker away, not joining in. Then came the police sirens, the flash of lights. His face pressed against the rough asphalt, while Bale called in the arrest. "The defendant," Voss was saying, her voice rising with practiced emotion, "would have you believe he was attempting to stop violence. But the evidence tells a different story. The injuries sustained by the victim are consistent with multiple attackers. The defendant's presence at the scene, his involvement in the altercation, these are not coincidences. A door opened at the back of the courtroom. Judge Halden Price entered, his black robes settling around him like armor as he took his seat. His expression remained carefully neutral, but Malik saw something in his eyes, a coldness that made him shiver despite the stuffy courtroom air. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Price asked, his tone suggesting this was merely routine paperwork rather than a young man's life hanging in the balance. The jury foreperson stood, a piece of paper trembling slightly in her hands. Malik felt his legs wobble as he rose. His grandmother's quiet, "Lord, have mercy," carried from the gallery. Malik focused on staying upright, remembering Evelyn's words from that morning. "Hold yourself straight, baby. Don't let them see you bend." The paper crinkled as the foreperson unfolded it. In the heavy silence, Malik could hear everything. The scratch of the court reporter's pen, someone coughing in the back row, Deputy Bale shifting his weight with anticipation. D.A. Voss had turned slightly, watching him instead of the jury, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The foreperson cleared her throat. "In the case of the state versus Malik Rowe, on the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant." Malik felt Tessa's hand brush his arm, meant to steady him, he knew, but nothing could steady him now. His future balanced on the next word, teetering between college applications and prison jumpsuits, between his grandmother's proud smile and her tears against a visitation room window. Guilty. The word guilty still echoed in Malik's ears as Judge Price shuffled papers on his bench, checking his watch with the impatience of someone eager to move on to more important matters. The morning sun had grown harsh through the tall windows, casting stark shadows across the judge's face that made his features seem carved from stone. Malik felt his wrists trembling as two deputies edged closer to the defense table. Their hands rested casually on their belts, but there was nothing casual about how they positioned themselves. One slightly behind him, one to his right, boxing him in like he was already dangerous. Like the verdict had transformed him from a 17-year-old honor student into something that needed containing. "Will the defendant please rise?" Judge Price commanded, not bothering to look up from his papers. The words came out clipped, administrative, like ordering coffee. Malik stood on legs that didn't feel quite solid. Tessa Lang rose beside him, her shoulder nearly touching his, a small gesture of solidarity that made his throat tight. He could hear his grandmother's breath catching in the gallery behind him, could feel the weight of everyone watching. Judge Price finally looked up, his reading glasses catching the light. "Malik Rowe, this court has considered the severity of your crime, the evidence presented, and the clear danger you pose to this community." He paused, adjusting his glasses with manicured fingers. "Your actions demonstrate a shocking disregard for human life and public safety. This court cannot ignore such blatant violence." Malik wanted to speak, to explain again about trying to help the victim, about pulling the real attacker away. But Tessa's hand brushed his arm in silent warning. Speaking now would only make things worse. "Therefore," Price continued, his tone suggesting mild annoyance at having to explain something obvious, "this court sentences you to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving a minimum of 25 years. The words hit Malik like physical blows. Life. 25 years. Numbers that meant he'd be older than his grandmother before he had a chance at freedom. The room tilted sideways for a moment before he forced himself to focus on his breathing, just like Evelyn had taught him. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Stay upright. A chair scraped against wood as Evelyn Rowe stood in the gallery. Her voice cut through the murmuring crowd. clear and steady as Sunday bells. "You're stealing a child!" She didn't shout, but her words carried authority earned through 72 years of standing firm. You wrap it in legal papers, but that's what this is. Stealing a child's life while pretending it's justice. Judge Price's face darkened. "Mrs. Rowe, you will be seated or face contempt charges." "Contempt?" Evelyn's laugh held no humor. "You sentence my grandson to die in prison for trying to stop a beating, and you talk to me about contempt?" Two bailiffs moved toward her, their heavy hands pushing her back into her seat with more force than necessary. Malik turned, trying to catch her eye, to somehow tell her not to fight this. Not here, not now. But the deputies beside him grabbed his arms, holding him in place. At the prosecution table, D.A. Kendra Voss methodically packed her leather folder, a small, satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She'd won another case, added another conviction to her record. Malik wondered if she'd remember his name by tomorrow, or if he'd just become another statistic in her career. His eyes scanned the courtroom, searching for his mother's face among the spectators. Nia Rowe's absence felt like another wound. She'd promised to be here, had sworn she wouldn't miss her son's verdict no matter what. The empty space where she should have been screamed louder than any testimony. In the back row, Malik found 12-year-old Imani pressed against Evelyn's side, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. His little sister, who'd asked him just that morning to help with her science project next weekend. The project would be due before he'd even finish processing into the prison system. "Malik," Tessa's voice was low, urgent. "Listen to me. We're going to appeal immediately. These things take time, but you have to stay calm right now. Do exactly what they tell you in custody. Don't give them any excuse." Her eyes held his, trying to anchor him in the storm. "We're not done fighting." Deputy Bale stepped closer, jingling his handcuffs with deliberate slowness. He leaned in close enough that only Malik could hear him whisper, "Guess you won't be playing superhero anymore, boy. Should have minded your own business that night." His breath smelled like coffee and satisfaction as he added, "Welcome to the real world." The cold metal of the cuffs bit into Malik's wrists as Bale fastened them too tight. Not enough to leave marks, just enough to hurt. Just enough to remind Malik who had the power now. The chain between his hands clinked as he tried to find a position that didn't cut into his skin. A door opened behind the judge's bench, not the main entrance where spectators came and went, but the private door reserved for court officials. Footsteps approached, measured and purposeful against the wooden floor. Malik couldn't see who it was through the crowd of deputies now surrounding him, but he felt the atmosphere in the courtroom shift. The air seemed to grow heavier, charged with something he couldn't name. The heavy doors swung wide with deliberate force, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent courtroom. Every head turned as if pulled by invisible strings, attention magnetized to the unexpected interruption. U.S. Attorney General Lucien stood in the doorway, his presence filling the space before he took a single step. His dark suit was immaculate, crisp lines and perfect creases that spoke of power worn like comfortable armor. Two federal security agents flanked him, their earpieces and subtle bulges under their jackets, marking them as something far above local law enforcement. The change in the room hit like a pressure wave. Court clerks' fingers froze mid-keystroke, their screens blinking silently. Deputies who had been lounging against walls snapped to attention, hands shifting uncertainly near their weapons. D.A. Kendra. Voss's satisfied smile crumbled as she registered who had just walked into her victory. Judge Price's jaw tightened visibly, the tendons in his neck standing out against his collar. His hands gripped the edge of his bench, knuckles whitening as if bracing against a storm. Lucien moved through the courtroom with measured steps, his shoes clicking against the polished floor in a steady rhythm. He passed D.A. Voss without so much as a glance, though she half rose from her chair as if expecting acknowledgement. The snub was so pointed, it drew a few sharp inhales from the gallery. He stopped directly in front of Malik, close enough that the teenager could see the perfect Windsor knot in his silk tie, could smell the subtle cologne that seemed more like authority than scent. Lucien's dark eyes studied Malik's face with careful intensity, as if matching it against a memory or a photograph he'd carried too long. Malik tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't come. The handcuffs felt heavier now, more shameful under this man's gaze. Questions crashed against each other in his mind. Who was this? Why was he here? Why was everyone so afraid? Behind him, Evelyn rose again, but differently this time. Her movements were careful, measured, like someone watching a snake they weren't sure would strike. She read the room's tension like verses she'd memorized long ago, her eyes narrowing as she tracked the power shifting in the air. Lucien Cross turned then, positioning himself so his words would carry to every corner of the courthouse. His voice was deep, perfectly controlled, and dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. "That's my son." The explosion of murmurs was instant. Phones appeared in hands throughout the gallery, their cameras raising like an electronic salute to the moment. A reporter in the back row actually bolted for the door, his shoes squeaking against the floor in his haste to break the story first. "Order!" Judge Price's gavel cracked against the wood, but his voice betrayed him, cracking on the second syllable. "This court will have order." But order was a fiction now. The gallery buzzed with urgent whispers. "The Attorney General? His son? Did you know? How is this possible?" Malik felt hope surge through his chest, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. This had to fix everything. The highest law enforcement official in the country had just claimed him as family. The life sentence, the conviction, the whole twisted mess. It would all dissolve now, wouldn't it? Deputy Bale had backed away, his earlier smugness replaced by something that looked very much like fear. D.A. Voss was frantically shuffling papers, her perfectly manicured nails catching on corners in her haste. Lucien raised one hand slightly, and the room fell silent again, not from legal authority, but from raw power. "Your Honor," he said, his tone so polite it was almost painful, "I request a brief conference in chambers." Judge Price's face had gone from red to pale, then back to red. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Attorney General. We've just passed sentence in a properly concluded—" "In chambers," Lucien repeated, softer this time. Something in his voice made it clear this wasn't a request anyone wanted to refuse. "Now!" Price stood, his robes rustling as if trying to maintain dignity that was already escaping. "Very well. Officers, maintain custody of the defendant." Malik watched as the two men disappeared through the door behind the bench, his breath caught somewhere between his throat and his lungs. The federal agents remained by the gallery entrance, their presence a reminder that something much bigger than a local court case was unfolding. Evelyn's hand found his shoulder, somehow reaching him through the wall of deputies. Her touch carried strength, but he could feel a tremor in her fingers that matched the uncertainty in his heart. They waited together, the whole courtroom suspended in a moment that felt both endless and too brief. The chamber's door remained closed, hiding whatever conversation was happening behind its heavy wood. Each second stretched like taffy, sweet with possibility, but growing thinner with tension. Malik's handcuffs clinked softly as he shifted his weight, the sound seeming too loud in the strained silence. Someone coughed in the gallery. A phone buzzed somewhere, quickly silenced. The court reporter's machine hummed softly, ready to record whatever happened next. They all waited, breath held, for the door to open and reveal which version of justice would emerge. Judge Price emerged from chambers first, his face a careful mask of judicial composure. The slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted his robes betrayed the facade. Lucien Cross followed, his expression equally unreadable, though his presence seemed to fill the courtroom with an electric tension. Malik's heart pounded against his ribs. This was it, the moment when everything would change. The United States Attorney General, his father, would surely demand his immediate release. The nightmare would end. Lucien stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. The gallery leaned forward as one, phones raised to capture what everyone assumed would be a historic moment of justice. Even the deputies loosened their grip on Malik's arms, anticipating orders to remove the handcuffs. But Lucien's words fell like ice water into the heated room. "We will proceed according to law." 6 words. Simple, precise, devastating. Malik felt the floor vanish beneath him, vertigo clawing at his stomach. The same hands that had claimed him as family now seemed to push him away. His throat closed around questions he couldn't voice. Why claim me just to abandon me? Why make this public only to walk away? Evelyn's sharp intake of breath cut through the confused murmurs. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Lucien's face, reading something in his careful stance that others missed. Her fingers worked the worn handkerchief with methodical precision, like she was untangling a complex knot only she could see. D.A. Kendra Voss seized the moment, rising from her chair with practiced grace. "This demonstrates what we've said all along," she announced, her voice carrying perfectly. Clearly rehearsed for unexpected cameras. Equal justice under law. No special treatment, no matter who your family might be. She smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. The Attorney General's presence only confirms the fairness of these proceedings. The gallery stirred uncomfortably. A few heads nodded, though whether in agreement or simply processing the shock was unclear. Deputy Bale's smirk returned, smaller but unmistakable. Judge Price cleared his throat, authority restored by this unexpected turn. "The defendant will be remanded immediately to begin serving his sentence." He shuffled papers on his bench, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Bailiffs, proceed." The deputies moved with synchronized efficiency, as if they'd practiced this moment. Their hands tightened on Malik's arms, already steering him toward the side door that led to the holding cells. Tessa Lang shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. "Your Honor, this is unnecessarily rushed. We haven't even had time to file our initial appeal paperwork." "Counsel!" Price cut her off, his voice sharp. "You're bordering on contempt. The verdict is entered, sentence is passed. If you have appeals to file them through proper channels." "But, Your Honor—" "One more word, Ms. Lang, and you'll face sanctions." The threat hung in the air like smoke. "Do you understand?" Tessa's jaw clenched, but she nodded stiffly. Her hands gripped her legal pad so tightly the edges crumpled. Malik tried to turn his head, desperate for one last look at his grandmother, but the deputies kept him facing forward. He could hear Imani's muffled sobs from somewhere behind him, the sound cutting deeper than any sentence. They marched him toward the side door, past the empty jury box where 12 strangers had decided his fate, past D.A. Voss's table, where she was already packing her briefcase with efficient triumph, past Lucien Cross, who stood perfectly still, watching his son being led away with eyes that revealed nothing. The corridor outside felt colder, institutional lighting washing everything in sickly fluorescent green. Metal doors lined the walls, each one marking another step away from freedom, away from family, away from everything he'd known. Behind him, in the courtroom, he heard his grandmother's voice rise in protest, dignified but fierce. Then another voice, smooth, professional, blocking her path. "Mrs. Rowe, I'm Claire Davidson, Chief of Staff to the Attorney General." The voices grew fainter as the deputies led him deeper into the holding area. He caught fragments. "Not here. Proper channels. This card. When, the time." The metal door at the end of the corridor loomed closer. Each step echoed off the concrete walls, a countdown to separation. Malik's legs felt wooden, moving automatically while his mind raced. What had just happened? Why had Lucien Cross appeared only to step aside? Why did Evelyn seem to see something in it that he couldn't grasp? The questions tangled in his throat, unasked and unanswered. The handcuffs bit into his wrists, cold metal against skin that felt too sensitive, too aware of every sensation that might be the last of its kind for years. They reached the final door. One deputy reached for the keypad, while the other maintained his grip on Malik's arm. Through the narrowing gap between closing doors, Malik caught one last glimpse of the main corridor. Evelyn stood there, straight-backed and steel-eyed, holding something small and white, a business card. Her expression was unreadable, but her posture spoke of someone preparing for a long siege. The heavy door swung shut with a hollow clang, sealing Malik into the holding area. The sound echoed off concrete walls, marking the moment when life in prison stopped being words and became cold reality. The fluorescent lights in the courthouse basement buzzed like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across the institutional green walls. Malik sat on a metal bench, the cold seeping through his thin court clothes. His wrists ached where the handcuffs bit into them, but he kept his face carefully blank, the way Evelyn had taught him. Show nothing. Feel everything. 20 feet away, Tessa Lang stood at the processing window, her voice rising with controlled frustration as she argued with a clerk whose expression suggested both boredom and spite. "These papers can't possibly be processed this quickly," Tessa insisted, tapping her pen against the counter. "Standard procedure requires at least 24 hours for transfer documentation." The clerk barely glanced up from her computer screen. "Nothing standard about this case, Counselor." Malik shifted on the hard bench, trying to find a position that hurt less. A deputy stood nearby, scrolling through his phone with deliberate disinterest. The basement corridor felt like limbo. Not quite jail, not quite court, but somewhere in between where rules bent like shadows. Movement caught his eye. Through a door left slightly ajar about 15 feet away, Malik glimpsed familiar figures. Judge Price's robes were unmistakable, even in the dim light of what appeared to be a file room. D.A. Voss stood beside him, her prosecutorial confidence now tinged with something more predatory. But it was the third person who made Malik's pulse quicken. A man in an expensive suit, holding a folder emblazoned with a corporate logo he recognized from news stories about private prisons. Malik leaned forward slightly, straining to hear. The suited man's voice carried just enough. "Beds are down this quarter." The words were casual, like discussing inventory at a hotel. Judge Price's response came quickly, equally businesslike. "This one's sealed. Transfer him tonight." "Make sure the narrative sticks," Voss added, her tone suggesting this was routine. Just another day of processing young black men into profit margins. Malik's stomach lurched. The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. This wasn't just about racism, wasn't just about a system designed to crush people who looked like him. This was spreadsheets and stockholders. This was quotas masked as justice. His life sentence wasn't just meant to cage him, it was meant to fill a cell that would generate revenue. He thought of all the times Evelyn had told him to be careful, how she'd explained that some people saw black boys as walking dollar signs. He'd understood she meant bail bondsmen, predatory loans, targeted policing. But this was different. This was industrial. This was his freedom being traded like a commodity. The deputy noticed Malik's attention wandering. In 2 quick steps, He crossed the space between them and slammed Malik back against the wall. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs. "Eyes forward," the deputy growled, close enough that Malik could smell coffee and mint gum. "This ain't a tourist spot." Malik forced his gaze to the floor, heart hammering. The deputy's hand stayed heavy on his shoulder, a reminder of how quickly violence could erupt. He'd seen it before. How fast disobedient became threatening, how resistance became reason for force. Tessa's heels clicked rapidly across the floor as she returned, her face drained of color. She held a stack of papers in trembling hands. "They've already processed the transfer order," she said quietly, kneeling beside Malik so the deputy couldn't easily hear. "It's irregular. Everything about this is irregular. They're sending you to Greystone Ridge." Malik knew the name. Everyone did. A private facility 3 hours away, notorious for incidents that never quite made the news, where appeals went to die and inmates became statistics. "How fast can you file?" Malik started to ask, but the deputy's grip tightened painfully. "No legal consultation in the holding area," he barked. "Transport's waiting." Tessa stood, professional mask sliding back into place. "I'll be filing emergency motions first thing in the morning," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This rush to transfer is procedurally questionable at best." The deputy's radio crackled. "Transport ready in Bay 3. More deputies appeared, as if materialized from the shadows. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking Malik's restraints, patting him down again, though he hadn't been anywhere to acquire contraband. The processing felt mechanical, like being moved through an assembly line. They marched him down concrete corridors that grew progressively darker and colder. The basement levels of the courthouse were a maze designed to move bodies without disturbing the public areas above. No one wanted to see this part of the justice system, the actual mechanics of caging human beings. The loading bay door rolled up with a metallic groan. Outside, a white prison transport bus idled in the gathering dark, its exhaust creating ghost-like shapes in the security lights. The evening air hit Malik's face. His first breath of outside since morning, possibly his last for years. 2 transport officers waited by the bus's rear doors, their faces professionally blank. They took custody of Malik with practiced movements, guiding him up into the steel belly of the bus. The bench inside was somehow colder than the one in the corridor had been. As they secured his restraints to the floor-mounted chains beneath the seat, Malik caught a final glimpse through the bus's reinforced, barred windows. The courthouse rose above him, its classical columns now just dark shapes against the night sky. The lights that had seemed so harsh in the basement now shrank to distant, meaningless points. The doors slammed shut, with a finality that seemed to echo through his bones. The bus's engine rumbled, and they began to move. Each turn took him further from everything he knew. From Evelyn's strength, from Imani's tears, from any hope of quick justice. The prison transport bus growled through the night, its engine a constant rumble beneath the steel floor. Malik sat perfectly still, his wrists and ankles bound by chains that connected to a heavy metal loop welded to the seat in front of him. The other inmates, maybe 12 of them, were secured the same way, creating a symphony of quiet clinks with every bump in the road. The guard at the front kept the air conditioning blasting, though outside temperatures had already dropped into the low 50s. It wasn't about comfort. It was about control. Cold made people curl inward, made them quiet, made them weak. Malik watched an elderly inmate across the aisle trying to pull his thin jacket tighter, despite his restraints. "Number 2847, one of the guards called out suddenly, reading from Malik's paperwork with exaggerated volume. "Life sentence. Attempted murder." He looked up, making sure everyone heard. "Seems we got ourselves a real dangerous one here." Malik kept his eyes forward, remembering Evelyn's words from when he was small. "Sometimes silence is your shield, baby." The guard was fishing for reaction, trying to mark him as a target. The red high-risk stamp across his transfer papers was part of the same game. Deputy Bale's final gift, though the deputy himself wasn't here to deliver it. The bus slowed for a rest stop, its air brakes hissing like a tired beast. Through the reinforced windows, Malik could see the harsh fluorescent lights of a gas station. A TV mounted above the pumps played silent news footage. His stomach tightened as he recognized the courthouse steps from earlier that day. The headline scrolled across the bottom. U.S. Attorney General makes surprise appearance at local sentencing. The footage showed Lucien Cross's exit, reporters swarming like hungry birds. No mention of a son, no hint of injustice, just political theater, already sanitized for public consumption. "Eyes front!" a guard snapped, rapping his baton against the metal cage that separated the inmates from the aisle. Malik pulled his gaze away from the window, but the image stayed with him. His story being rewritten in real time, truth buried under carefully chosen words. The man beside Malik shifted slightly, his gray hair catching the passing street lights. He spoke so quietly that even the nearby inmates would struggle to hear. "Listen good, son. Private joints ain't like state facilities. They don't want appeals, don't want noise. They want quiet bodies that generate steady income." Malik gave the slightest nod, acknowledging without turning. The old-timer continued, his voice barely a whisper. "They'll try to break you fast. First week's crucial. Watch the guards who smile. They're the worst ones." "Thanks," Malik breathed back, careful to keep his lips still. The old man fell silent as a guard passed by, conducting his hourly check of restraints. The bus continued its journey through the darkness. Malik tried to track their direction. West, then north, then west again. But the monotony of highway lights and empty fields made it impossible to maintain his sense of orientation. His thoughts kept drifting to Evelyn, imagining her in their small kitchen, probably unable to sleep, probably praying with her worn Bible open before her. Hours passed. The cold seeped deeper, numbing Malik's fingers where the cuffs bit into his wrists. Some inmates dozed fitfully, chains rattling with their movements. Others stayed awake, eyes reflecting passing lights like captured animals. The guard up front played country music just loud enough to be irritating. Another small torture in a night full of them. A sign flashed past. Greystone County Line. The bus's engine note changed as they left the highway, taking smaller roads that wound through increasingly remote countryside. Malik felt the shift in energy among the other inmates. Those who'd been dozing came alert. Those already awake sat straighter. Everyone knew they were close. Through the windshield, Malik caught his first glimpse of Greystone Ridge Correctional Facility, known simply as Greystone to those who feared it. High walls topped with razor wire rose from the landscape like the ramparts of some ancient fortress. Floodlights created pools of harsh illumination, turning the surrounding darkness even deeper by contrast. The bus slowed as it approached the first checkpoint. Guards in towers tracked their progress with mounted spotlights. The outer gate, massive steel bars, rolled aside with mechanical precision. They passed through one secure area, then another, like being swallowed by a machine designed to digest hope. Finally, the bus stopped in a covered intake area. The engine died, leaving them in a silence broken only by the buzz of industrial lights and the subtle shifting of chains. Malik could feel tension radiating from the other inmates. Everyone knew that intake was where new hierarchies were established, where vulnerabilities were tested. "Stand up," the guard ordered, unlocking the cage door. "Single file. Any funny business, and you'll regret it." Metal clinked against metal as inmates rose carefully, their chains creating a grim percussion. Malik stood when his row was called, joints stiff from hours of immobility. The chain connecting his ankles allowed only 6-inch steps, a permanent shuffle designed to reinforce helplessness. Through the bus windows, Malik could see more guards assembling outside, their faces professionally blank, their body language suggesting barely restrained violence. Above them, mounted cameras recorded everything while seeing nothing that mattered. The facility's name was stenciled on the wall in stark black letters, a final welcome to those who'd been judged unworthy of freedom. The intake area blazed with harsh fluorescent lights that turned everything the color of old bones. Malik shuffled forward with the chain gang, his muscles aching from the long bus ride. The concrete floor felt like ice through his thin shoes. "Move it!" a guard's voice cracked through the air. "Line up against the yellow line, eyes forward, hands visible." Malik found his spot, careful to maintain perfect stillness. The yellow line was worn from countless others who'd stood in this same place, waiting to be processed, to be transformed from people into numbers. 2847! An officer with a clipboard approached, his badge reading Maxwell. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made Malik's spine tighten. "That's you, right? The lifer?" "Yes, sir." Malik kept his voice steady, neutral. "Name and sentence, loud and clear." Maxwell's pen hovered over his form. "Malik Rowe, life sentence for—" "Didn't ask what for," Maxwell cut him off. Several officers chuckled. "Just the number. That's all you are now." Behind Maxwell, 2 other guards exchanged knowing looks. One of them held Malik's intake paperwork, making a show of squinting at it. "Says here—" The guard paused for effect. "Well, what we got here is an animal. That right?" He wasn't using slurs, but his tone made the meaning clear. "Dangerous one, according to this red stamp." Malik's hands wanted to curl into fists. He forced them to stay loose, visible. The camera mounted on the far wall was pointed just slightly away from the intake line. Not an accident, he realized. This was a dead zone, a place where things could happen without being recorded. "Strip search!" Maxwell barked. "Everything off, now!" The fluorescent lights seemed to grow brighter, more exposing. Malik removed his clothes as ordered, enduring the humiliation of standing naked, while officers made comments designed to provoke. They searched him roughly, their latex gloves cold and impersonal. "Spread 'em wider!" one guard commanded, shoving Malik's ankle with his boot. "Squat and cough. Again! Again!" Malik complied, focusing on his breathing like Evelyn had taught him during panic attacks. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The guards were trying to break him early, establish dominance through degradation. After the search, they threw orange clothes at him, ill-fitting uniform, cheap canvas shoes. The final piece of his old identity was stripped away when an officer dumped his personal belongings onto a metal table. "Phone, wallet, watch." The officer droned, cataloging each item. He picked up Evelyn's small Bible, worn leather, pages marked with her neat handwriting. "Religious materials must be approved." "Please," Malik spoke before he could stop himself. "That's my grandmother's—" A guard's hand slammed into his shoulder, sending him stumbling backward. "Did anyone say you could speak?" "Problem here," Maxwell returned, eyebrows raised in mock concern. "No, sir," Malik managed, his shoulder throbbing. He watched the Bible get tossed into a box marked Review. A nurse appeared next, clipboard ready. "Any injuries to report?" Malik started to raise his hand toward his shoulder, but caught Maxwell's warning look. The nurse was already writing. "No injuries reported. Prior bruising appears self-inflicted during arrest." Just like that, another lie became official record. Malik's gaze drifted upward, a habit from years of fixing things, looking for loose wires, broken connections, anything that needed repair. Above a metal bench, he spotted it, a ceiling speaker with a slightly askew panel, the kind of minor flaw his fingers itched to correct. "Eyes down," a guard snapped. Maxwell consulted his clipboard again. "Cell assignment. Ah, B2114. He smiled that cold smile again. "Perfect spot for you." Several inmates who'd been waiting nearby went completely still. One of them, older, heavily tattooed, actually took a small step back. Malik filed away their reactions, knowing they meant something he'd need to understand quickly. "Medical screening next," Maxwell announced. "Then orientation. Welcome to Greystone, 2847. Hope you enjoy your stay." They herded Malik through more procedures: blood pressure, TB test, cursory dental check. Each step stripped away more humanity, reduced him further to numbers on forms. The intake process was efficient, practiced, a machine designed to break people down into manageable parts. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 90 minutes, a new guard appeared to escort him to his cell. The unit doors buzzed open one by one, each sound echoing off concrete and steel. Other inmates watched through narrow cell windows as Malik passed, their expressions unreadable in the dim light. The guard stopped at B214. The cell door slid open with a metallic screech that set Malik's teeth on edge. Inside, shadows pooled in the corners, and the air smelled of industrial cleaner, barely masking something worse. "Home sweet home," the guard said, and gave Malik a small push forward. The door slammed shut behind him with a sound like a judge's gavel. Final. Testing. Absolute. The mattress felt like packed newspaper under Malik's back as he stared at the ceiling, too tense to sleep. Shouts echoed through Greystone's corridors, some angry, some frightened, all distant enough to sound almost unreal. Heavy boots passed his cell regularly, a reminder that someone was always watching. Through his narrow window, the sky hadn't yet begun to lighten. Malik counted his breaths, trying to stay focused despite exhaustion. The cell was barely wide enough to stretch his arms, with a steel toilet sink combo that made metallic sounds at random intervals. Everything smelled of industrial bleach, and something underneath that he didn't want to identify. A guard banged his baton against the bars. "Rise and shine, princess!" Breakfast line. Malik got up quickly, smoothing his orange uniform. He'd learned from watching arrests: move steady, stay visible, no sudden gestures. The cell door opened with an electric whine. "B block, breakfast formation." The guard's voice boomed down the tier. Malik followed the other inmates toward the cafeteria, careful to maintain exact spacing. He memorized each turn, each checkpoint. Knowledge meant survival. "Wrong line, 2847. A guard grabbed Malik's arm, yanking him backward. "This is a block's slot." "Sir, I was told." "Back of the line, now." The guard's grip tightened painfully. Malik retreated, noting how several inmates smirked. 20 minutes later, it happened again. A different guard. Same accusation. When Malik finally reached the cafeteria, his slot time had nearly expired. He grabbed a tray of lukewarm eggs and sat where directed. The fluorescent lights made everyone's skin look sickly. A guard with Peterson on his badge approached, stopping directly behind Malik. "Hey, everyone!" Peterson called out, voice carrying. "You know what we got here? A cop killer." Heads turned. Several inmates stood up, muscles tensing. Malik's hands wanted to shake, but he kept them steady on his tray. "That's not true," he said quietly, clearly. "My charge—" "Shut it!" Peterson snapped. "Nobody asked you to speak." Malik forced himself to eat slowly, while hostile eyes tracked his movements. He noticed which inmates immediately believed the guard, which ones waited to see reactions, which ones spoke quietly to trustees who worked in the office. Every detail mattered. After breakfast came work assignment, laundry detail. Malik sorted sheets into massive industrial washers, the heat making his uniform stick to his skin. He was checking load times when heavy steps approached. 28:47. A new guard appeared, blocking the exit. His name tag read Torres. Got a minute? It wasn't a question. Torres herded Malik into a corner between machines, just out of camera view. Listen up, Torres said, voice casual. This doesn't have to be hard. Deputy Bale, good man, by the way, just needs you to sign a statement. Confirm his report about that night. Do that. Things get easier. Don't do it. He shrugged. Well, life sentences can feel mighty long. Malik met Torres's eyes, keeping his voice respectful but firm. I can't sign something that isn't true, sir. Torres's friendly manner vanished. Have it your way, tough guy. Within an hour, Malik was reassigned to a new cell block, one where inmates paced like caged animals, where fights erupted hourly. His new neighbors included a man who'd beaten his cellmate into a coma last month. Oh, by the way, Torres stopped by during lunch. Your lawyer called. Appeal's been denied already. Guess you should have taken the deal. Malik knew it was a lie. Appeals took months to process, but the words still hit like a punch. His hands trembled as he tried to eat. He thought of Evelyn in church, spine straight despite arthritis, voice clear despite fear. Hold yourself upright, she always said. That's yours. They can't take it. He forced his shoulders back, steadied his breathing. They wanted him broken. He wouldn't give them that. Back in his cell, Malik studied the ceiling speaker again. The loose panel wasn't just wear and tear. Someone had deliberately pried it open, then tried to hide the tampering. His fingers itched to investigate, to understand the system's weakness. But not yet. First, he needed to learn more patterns, more players, more rules. He lay on his bunk, appearing to rest while his mind worked. Who had access to maintenance? Which guards watched which cameras? When did shift changes happen? Every detail could matter. Through his window, the morning sun finally cleared the fence line, casting harsh shadows across his cell. Malik closed his eyes but didn't sleep. They wanted him to break or submit. He would do neither. Somewhere in this machine was a flaw, a loose wire, a way to make truth heard. He just had to stay calm enough to find it. The speaker crackled with static, then fell silent. Malik kept his eyes closed, but his mind recorded the sound's pattern, filing it away with all the other pieces he was gathering. Survival meant patience. Patience meant staying upright, no matter what came next. The cell block hummed with distant voices and footsteps as Malik sat on his bunk, listening. Through his narrow window, he could see inmates filing out for recreation time, their orange uniforms bright against the concrete yard. Guard Peterson's voice boomed across the speakers, calling out stragglers. Malik had declined rec time, claiming a headache. The guard had smirked, probably thinking Malik was afraid to go outside. Let them think that. He needed this window of time. His fingers found the plastic toothbrush he'd hidden in his mattress seam. Last night, he'd carefully worked it against the concrete floor until one edge was thin enough to serve as a tool. From under his Bible, he retrieved a strip of copper wire he'd pulled from a broken fan in the laundry room. The speaker above his bunk waited, its loose panel a temptation he couldn't ignore. Years of fixing broken electronics had taught him to spot patterns in wiring, to understand how systems connected. This wasn't just about mechanics anymore. It was about survival. Standing on his bunk, Malik reached up with steady hands. The plastic edge slipped perfectly into the gap where someone had previously tampered with the panel. He worked slowly, methodically, the way he used to when replacing delicate phone screens for extra cash. "Keep breathing," he whispered to himself, hearing Evelyn's voice in his head. Slow and steady. The panel came loose with a soft click. Malik's heart hammered, but his hands remained controlled as he examined the wiring inside. Behind the main speaker connection, he found what he'd suspected: a separate line carrying maintenance audio. The setup reminded him of an old church sound system he'd once repaired, where different audio feeds ran parallel. Using the wire strip, Malik fashioned a crude tap, carefully splitting the signal. Each twist had to be precise. Any obvious damage would give him away. He'd learned this trick fixing radios with his cousin, though they'd never imagined he'd use it like this. Voices drifted up from the corridor below, guards talking, their footsteps lazy with routine. Malik's fingers froze. "That new kid? The one from county?" A guard's voice carried clearly. "Judge wants him quiet." "Yeah, medical's already got the paperwork ready." Another guard laughed. "In case he has an accident. Long as it's clean. Don't need attention right now." Malik's chest tightened, but he forced himself to keep working. The tap had to be perfect. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was evidence. His fingers remembered their training. Twist, secure, test. Each movement precise, despite the fear coursing through him. From his Bible, he pulled out the small recording device he'd assembled from pieces of an old MP3 player found in the laundry's lost and found. It wasn't much, just enough capacity to capture audio, but it was something. He connected it carefully, tucking it into a hidden space behind the panel. The guards' voices continued below, unaware. Transfers already approved anyway. Once he's deeper in the system, nobody'll care. True. These kids always break eventually. Malik's hands wanted to shake, but he wouldn't let them. Each word recorded was another piece of truth they couldn't erase. He thought of Evelyn at his trial, refusing to look away as the judge sentenced him. If she could stay strong through that, he could stay steady now. He tested the connection one final time, making sure the tap was secure but invisible. Everything had to look untouched. In the repair shop, he'd learned that the best fixes were the ones nobody could spot. That lesson meant something different now. Footsteps approached his cell block. Time was running out. Malik worked the panel back into place, checking each edge. The plastic toothbrush disappeared into his mattress seam. The remaining wire went back under his Bible. The recording device hummed quietly in its hiding place, warm like a secret pulse behind the speaker. Malik smoothed his uniform and sat on his bunk, picking up his Bible just as guard Peterson passed by. "Still hiding in here?" Peterson sneered through the bars. "Just reading, sir," Malik replied, voice neutral. He'd learned to make himself sound tired, unthreatening. "Counts in 10 minutes. Don't be late." Malik nodded, keeping his expression blank until the footsteps faded. His hand brushed the speaker panel one last time. Everything looked normal. No signs of tampering, no loose edges, nothing to suggest the truth hidden behind it. The cell block started filling again as recreation time ended. Malik stood, tucking his Bible away. The recorder was secure above, capturing every word, every threat, every casual cruelty they thought no one would ever hear. He stepped out for count, falling into line with other inmates. Overhead, the speaker crackled with announcements, and beneath that sound, his small device recorded on, holding secrets like a mechanical witness. The truth was there now, preserved in circuits and wire, waiting to be heard. The afternoon sun slanted through the library annex's barred windows, casting zebra-striped shadows across worn tables. Malik moved methodically between them, wiping surfaces with a gray rag that had seen better days. The room smelled of old books and industrial cleaner, a mix that reminded him of his high school janitor's closet, back when life made sense. Officer Reeves stood near the door, more interested in his phone than watching Malik work. That was fine. Being invisible had advantages. Malik had learned to move slowly, to look occupied, while his mind worked on larger problems. The recorder hidden in his cell weighed on his thoughts, Having evidence meant nothing if he couldn't get it out safely. "You missed a spot." The voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. Malik turned to find an older white inmate watching him from behind a book cart. Gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of straight-backed posture that spoke of years organizing shelves. The man's orange uniform was meticulously clean, his ID card identifying him as Railen Finch. Malik nodded and re-wiped the already clean spot. Better to look compliant than draw attention. Railen wheeled his cart closer, arranging books with practiced precision. "Your hands," he murmured, not looking up. "They move like someone who fixes things." Malik's shoulders tensed. He'd been careful to hide his technical skills since arriving. Knowledge could be dangerous here. "I used to watch kids like you in my library," Railen continued, voice low and steady. "The ones who'd rather take apart a computer than read about it. Always checking how systems work." Malik kept wiping, moving to the next table. Railen followed with his cart, maintaining their bubble of quiet conversation away from Officer Reeves. "You fixing something?" Railen asked, adjusting his glasses. Malik studied the old man's face, looking for traps. But Raylan's eyes held something familiar. The same careful observation he'd seen in Evelyn when she studied church board politics. This wasn't an informant's fishing expedition. This was recognition. Still, Malik stayed silent. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Railen nodded, as if the silence itself was an answer. "When I was a public librarian, I learned something important. Records matter more than rhetoric. They can't deny what's documented." He shelved a book precisely. "Especially when it's properly preserved. Chain of custody. Multiple copies. Legal channels." The words "chain of custody" made Malik's pulse quicken. That was evidence language. Legal language. "Got myself in trouble documenting things people wanted hidden," Railen continued. "County corruption, missing funds, certain judges' private dealings." He paused. "I know how facilities like this handle inconvenient evidence. They're very good at making things disappear." Malik moved closer, pretending to wipe an already clean section. "How good are they at making sounds disappear?" he whispered. Raylan's fingers stilled on his book cart. "Depends on how the sounds are stored, and how they travel." He adjusted another book unnecessarily. "Legal mail has special protections, especially to licensed attorneys. Guards can't accidentally lose it without consequences." Malik thought of his hidden recorder, of the guards' casual threats captured in electronic memory. He thought of Tessa Lang, still fighting his case outside these walls. What if someone had proof of outside influence, of planned incidents? "Then that someone would need to move very carefully," Railen replied. "This place destroys what it can't control. But they're not all-powerful. There are still rules they have to follow, procedures they can't ignore without raising flags." He pulled out a thin volume and held it out to Malik. "This might interest you. Chapter 3, especially, about proper documentation procedures." Malik took the book, a worn copy about legal rights. As he did, Railen slipped him a small folded paper, a carefully detailed plan for getting evidence out through legal mail channels. "Your grandmother," Railen said softly. "She visits on Thursdays?" Malik nodded, tucking the paper into his sleeve. "Good. Timing matters. Evidence should move the same day outside contacts are notified. Prevents administrative delays." Raylan's eyes flickered to Officer Reeves, still absorbed in his phone. "Your attorney needs to be ready to act immediately." Hope stirred in Malik's chest. Not the desperate kind he'd felt when Lucien Cross had entered the courtroom, but something steadier. This was strategy. This was resistance with roots, taught by elders who'd fought these battles before. "Some of us," Railen said, straightening a row of books with careful hands, "have been waiting a long time to see certain systems exposed. We know how to help truth travel. Malik thought of Evelyn, of her quiet strength in the courtroom, of her years teaching him to stand upright in a world that wanted him to bend. Here was another elder offering wisdom, another link in a chain of resistance stretching back generations. They worked in companionable silence after that, Malik wiping tables while Railen shelved books. No more words were needed. The plan was set, the path forward clear. For the first time since his transfer, Malik felt the weight of isolation lift slightly. When Officer Reeves finally called time, Malik handed back his cleaning supplies and walked toward the exit. Behind him, Raylan's voice carried softly. "Records outlast rage, young man. Remember that." Back in his cell as evening approached, Malik sat on his bunk, the hidden recorder secure above him. He could hear boots in the corridor, pausing outside his door, guards listening, watching, waiting for him to break. But he wasn't alone anymore. There was a plan now, and people who knew how to execute it. The boots lingered, their presence meant to intimidate. Malik remained still, his face neutral, while his mind worked through the steps ahead. They thought they had all the power, but they didn't know about Railen or Evelyn or the quiet network of resistance that refused to let truth disappear. The heavy boots lingered outside Malik's cell, their shadows stretching across the floor like accusing fingers. He kept his expression neutral, focusing on the worn pages of his grandmother's Bible, while his heart hammered against his ribs. After what felt like hours, the radio crackled. Count cleared, and the boots finally moved on. Malik waited until the footsteps faded before letting out a careful breath. Tomorrow would test everything. He thought of Raylan's detailed instructions, memorizing each step until sleep finally came. Morning arrived with the usual harsh fluorescent glare and rattling doors. Malik joined the breakfast line, forcing himself to eat despite his churning stomach. Across the cafeteria, he caught Raylan's slight nod. The plan was still on. At precisely 9:30 a.m., the unit officer announced legal mail collection. Malik had already sealed the micro-recorder in an envelope addressed to Tessa Lang, marking it clearly as privileged legal correspondence. His hands were steady. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. Railen moved first, approaching the officer's desk with a thick stack of paperwork. "Sir, I need to discuss my grievance procedure." His voice carried the precise, measured tone of someone who knew every regulation by heart. According to Policy 23B, subsection 4, the guard's face clouded with irritation. "Finch, we've been through this." "Actually, sir," Railen continued, positioning himself to block the officer's view of the mail bin, "the administrative directive clearly states—" Malik approached from the other side, envelope in hand. As Railen launched into another detailed citation, Malik slipped his package into the bin, making sure it settled between other legal letters. He moved away quickly, but not too quickly. Hurrying would draw attention. "Furthermore," Railen was saying, "the timeline for response is clearly outlined in—" "Enough!" The guard cut him off. "File your complaint like everyone else." Railen gathered his papers with deliberate slowness. "Of course, sir. I just wanted to ensure proper procedure was followed." By lunch, something had shifted in the air. Guards were huddled in small groups, speaking in low voices. Malik caught fragments. "Federal inquiry," and "outside attention." The usual taunts and provocations ceased. Even Deputy Warden Morris, who typically strutted through the unit like a peacock, walked quickly past Malik's cell without making eye contact. In the afternoon yard, an older inmate named Turner fell into step beside Malik. "Whatever you did," he muttered, "it's got them spooked. 3 suits showed up asking questions." Malik kept walking, face carefully blank. Inside, hope fluttered dangerous wings. The real confirmation came during dinner count. Officer Jenkins, who'd delighted in accidentally spilling Malik's food tray the day before, now called his name with clipped professionalism. No sneers, no threatening undertones, just business. Later, during evening phone time, Malik finally heard Tessa's voice. She spoke quickly, professionally, knowing the calls were monitored. "Motion filed this morning," she said. "A federal judge issued a temporary injunction 20 minutes ago. They can't transfer you, and Greystone has to preserve all records, including surveillance footage." "Thank you," Malik said carefully, thinking of the guard's conversations captured on his hidden recording. "Stay alert," Tessa added. "This is just the first step. I'll be there tomorrow to discuss strategy." Back in his cell, Malik noticed subtle changes. The usual intimidation tactics, guard boots deliberately scuffing past his door, taunts about lifetime residence, had vanished. Even some of the inmates who'd avoided him now offered small acknowledgments. A nod, a raised chin, the quiet recognition of someone who'd landed a blow against the system. During evening medication line, Railen passed nearby. "Well done," he murmured. "But remember, wounded animals are the most dangerous." Malik understood. This wasn't victory. It was escalation. The system wouldn't simply surrender because it had been caught in one lie. But for the first time since his conviction, the weight felt slightly lighter. Someone outside these walls had heard the truth. Someone with power was asking questions. Night settled over Greystone like a heavy blanket. Malik sat on his bunk, allowing himself to feel something close to peace. The recorder was safely in Tessa's hands. The federal injunction would force scrutiny. Maybe this was how change happened. Not in dramatic courtroom moments, but in small acts of resistance, in carefully preserved truth. He thought of Evelyn, imagining her reaction when Tessa called with the news. His grandmother would understand the significance. Evidence couldn't be lost now. Stories couldn't be rewritten quite so easily. The machine that had tried to swallow him whole had finally been forced to pause. Malik closed his eyes and took one deep, clean breath. After days of constant tension, he let his shoulders relax slightly. That's when the alarms began to wail. The alarms pierced the night like screaming banshees. Malik barely had time to stand before his cell door slammed open. Officers in riot gear flooded the tier, their boots thundering against metal grating. "On the ground! Everyone down!" The commands echoed off concrete walls as smoke began drifting up from somewhere below. "Block C! We got a situation in Block C!" An officer's radio crackled with manufactured urgency. But Malik noticed something odd. The response seemed rehearsed, like actors hitting their marks. Through his cell door, he saw other inmates being roughly pulled from their beds. The confusion was precise, calculated. Officers moved with too much certainty for real chaos. "Out! Now!" Two guards grabbed Malik's arms, yanking him into the corridor. The grip on his right bicep was painfully tight, fingers digging in like claws. They shoved him face first against the cold wall. "Stop resisting!" one shouted, though Malik hadn't moved. He recognized the tactic, creating a false narrative for the report they'd write later. A fist slammed into his kidney. Malik's knees buckled, but the guards held him up. Nearby, he heard the sickening crack of a baton meeting flesh, followed by a cry of pain. The sound was close enough to seem threatening, far enough to have no witnesses. "Move him!" someone ordered from behind. The guards dragged Malik around a corner, into a section he knew had no camera coverage. His feet barely touched the ground as they transported him like cargo. The slam into the floor knocked the wind from his lungs. A knee pressed into his back, while hands roughly cuffed him. Through spotty vision, Malik saw boots circling like sharks. "Shouldn't have caused trouble, boy," a voice drawled above him. "Now look what you made us do." More impacts followed. calculated strikes to areas that wouldn't show obvious bruising. Professional brutality. They knew exactly how to hurt without leaving evidence. Time blurred. Malik focused on breathing, on staying conscious. He thought of Evelyn's voice. Hold yourself upright inside, where they can't reach. When they finally dragged him to medical, the nurse barely looked up from her paperwork. Her pen scratched across the form, "Minor injuries sustained during altercation. Inmate combative during incident." "Sign here," she said, holding out a form. When Malik's shaking hand hesitated, a guard squeezed his shoulder. A warning. The nurse's documentation was already creating the official story. Any injuries would be blamed on Malik's resistance. His truth would vanish under institutional paperwork. Back in his cell, Malik heard them before he saw them. The maintenance crew arriving to inspect the speaker system. They made no pretense of being careful. The panel was ripped from the wall, wires yanked loose. They found the tap's hiding place with suspicious speed, as if they'd known exactly where to look. "Evidence of tampering," the maintenance supervisor announced loudly. "Inmate destroyed prison property." Another charge to add to their narrative. Another justification for whatever came next. As dawn approached, Malik caught fragments of phone conversations from the officer's station. Legal mail may have been compromised. Question the authenticity of any recordings. Pattern of disruptive behavior. They were building their defense before Tessa could even act on the evidence. The system protecting itself with paperwork and procedure. Through his swollen eye, Malik watched the morning shift change. New guards arrived with fresh paperwork. Transfer orders, disciplinary forms, incident reports. The machinery of punishment ground forward with bureaucratic efficiency. The breakfast cart rolled past his cell without stopping. Denial of meals wasn't in any official policy, but hunger was an easy weapon. Through the small window in his door, Malik saw other inmates being led to chow. Their eyes slid past his cell, trained by experience to see nothing. Around mid-morning, Railen appeared briefly in the corridor during movement time. Their eyes met for just a moment. The older man's face was grim, understanding. Then officers surrounded him, directing him toward a different unit. No explanation given. No paperwork needed. Just another disappearance in a place built for making people vanish. Malik sat on his thin mattress, gently touching his split lip. The message was clear. They would erase him piece by piece, grinding him down with small cruelties and official procedures. Each incident would be documented, justified, filed away. His resistance would become their evidence. His wounds would prove their story. The speaker hole gaped in his wall like an open wound. The recording device was gone, but they'd left the damage visible, a reminder of what happened to those who tried to expose the truth. Near noon, an officer walked the tier with a clipboard, reading names. Following inmates for administrative segregation. Pending review. Malik heard his name on the list, unsurprised. Segregation was their next move. Isolation. Sensory deprivation. Minimal human contact. They would lock him away and call it standard procedure. They would break him and call it rehabilitation. His hands clenched into fists, then relaxed. Let them write their reports. Let them file their paperwork. They could control the story inside these walls, but the truth had already escaped. Somewhere outside, Tessa held the evidence of their casual cruelty. The recording might be compromised, but it existed. The officer stopped at his cell. "Pack your property, Roe. Seg review." Malik stood slowly, carefully. His body ached, but he kept his spine straight. They could move him, hurt him, try to erase him, but they couldn't take what mattered: his resistance, his dignity, his truth. Morning sunlight streamed through Evelyn Rowe's kitchen window, falling across her hands as they trembled over the old biscuit tin. The phone call from Tessa Lang still rang in her ears, words like staged riot and deliberate assault making her stomach clench. She pulled the tin closer, its scratched surface familiar as scripture. The lid stuck slightly, as it always did, before revealing its treasure of carefully preserved papers. Evelyn had learned young. When systems lie, paper tells truth. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, spreading documents across her worn tablecloth. Here were mortgage statements reaching back decades, each payment highlighted and dated. Church programs yellowed with age, marking time through baptisms and funerals. Birth certificates, news clippings, the physical archive of a life lived carefully, with purpose. Then her fingers found it, the letter she'd kept, but never fully understood. The paper was thick, expensive, with a law firm's letterhead from 20 years ago. Lucien Cross's signature flowed across the bottom, bold and certain even then. Evelyn adjusted her reading glasses, focusing on the key paragraph. "Nia, I know you're angry about my absence, but there's something bigger happening. Price's case from last spring, the Morrison conviction, it's worse than we thought. The evidence that was lost didn't disappear by accident. I'm close to proving it. But the county's burying everything. People are being paid to stay quiet. I can't fight this and be there for you both right now. Please understand." The letter trembled in Evelyn's hands. Judge Halden Price's name jumped out like an accusation. She remembered the Morrison case, a young black man convicted of armed robbery, sentence later overturned. The details had vanished into sealed records and careful silence. "You've been doing this for years," Evelyn muttered, anger rising in her throat. She reached for her phone, fingers finding Marisol Vega's number. The investigative journalist had covered police misconduct before, asking questions others avoided. "Ms. Vega, this is Evelyn Rowe." "Yes, Malik's grandmother." "I have something you need to see." While waiting for Marisol, Evelyn scanned the letter again, finding more connections, references to standard procedures that masked discrimination, mentions of private companies profiting from high conviction rates, a system of quiet corruption running beneath official stories. She took photos of the letter, sending copies to Tessa Lang and the contact number Lucien's chief of staff had left. Her hands were steady now, anger replacing fear. They thought they could disappear her grandson into their machinery of profit and prejudice. They didn't know what it meant to face a grandmother's fury. Marisol arrived within the hour, recorder ready. She read the letter twice, taking careful notes. "This connects directly to current federal investigations," she said. "Price's sentencing patterns show racial bias, but they've never had evidence of earlier misconduct. This letter suggests knowledge of deliberate evidence tampering 20 years ago." Evelyn's phone buzzed. Lucien's chief of staff confirming receipt. The message was brief but clear. Letter received. Relevant to ongoing review of judicial conduct and private facility contracts. AG Cross will examine personally. "They've been watching Price," Marisol explained, checking her sources. "Federal investigators have been tracking suspicious connections between his harsh sentences and private prison occupancy rates. Your grandson's case forced their hand earlier than planned." Evelyn nodded slowly. "They tried to rush him away before anyone could look closer. And now Greystone's riot gives them excuse to isolate him," Marisol added, typing rapidly. "But Tessa Lang just filed for preservation of surveillance metadata. They'll have to prove when alarms were triggered, which guards were where. If it was staged, the timing will show it." Throughout the afternoon, Evelyn's kitchen became a command center. Marisol made calls, confirming details about the Morrison case. Tessa sent updates about emergency motions. Church members dropped by with food and support, their presence a reminder that some communities refuse to be silenced. Around 4, Word came from Greystone through the prison chaplain's office. The message was simple, but vital. Malik was in segregation, but unbroken. The chaplain had been allowed a brief visit, passing along Evelyn's words. "Your grandmother hasn't stopped moving." Evelyn touched the letter again, thinking of connections spanning decades. Lucien's absence from Malik's life had left scars, but it had also positioned him to fight the system from inside. The price of his distance was paid in missed birthdays and empty chairs. But now that same distance let him wield federal power against corrupt judges and private prisons. As evening approached, the letter made its way to Lucien Cross's desk in Washington. The Attorney General sat in his leather chair, reading words he'd written 20 years ago. His face hardened with resolve, seeing how Price's corruption had festered across decades, destroying lives while enriching private interests. The light outside his office window faded to dusk, but Lucien didn't move. He kept reading, remembering, understanding what had to happen next. The letter lay open before him, evidence of old wrongs demanding new justice. Morning light spilled across the courthouse steps as federal marshals escorted Malik from an unmarked vehicle. News cameras swung toward him like hungry animals, reporters shouting questions that bounced off stone walls. His orange jumpsuit stood stark against the gray building, hands still cuffed but head high, just as Evelyn had taught him. Inside, the familiar courtroom felt different. Every bench was packed, tension crackling through the air. Tessa Lang sat ready at the defense table, surrounded by stacks of documents and a laptop humming with data. Judge Halden Price entered with his usual measured stride, but something tight pulled at the corners of his mouth. "Emergency hearing in the matter of State versus Roe," Price announced, gavel striking wood with practiced authority. "I see we have additional counsel present." U.S. Attorney General Lucien Cross rose slowly from the prosecution table. Gone was any trace of the father who had appeared days ago. This was the nation's chief prosecutor, dressed in an immaculate dark suit that seemed to absorb light. Two federal agents flanked him, faces impassive. "Your Honor," Lucien said, voice carrying to every corner, "the United States has intervened in this matter due to evidence of systematic civil rights violations." Price's fingers whitened around his gavel. "Proceed." Tessa stood first, laptop screen casting blue light across her determined face. "Your Honor, we've received preserved metadata from Greystone Correctional's surveillance system." She turned the screen, displaying time-stamped camera logs. At 11:42 p.m., 4 cameras in Unit C were redirected away from common areas. At 11:45, alarms were manually triggered. The alleged riot began at 11:47. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Price tapped his gavel once, sharp and warning. "Furthermore," Tessa continued, "these redirections required administrative override codes. Codes that, according to facility records, were accessed from an external IP address traced to the county courthouse network." Before Price could respond, the courtroom doors swung open. Marisol Vega strode in, press badge glinting, followed by other reporters clutching phones displaying her just-published exposé. The story laid bare Price's sentencing patterns. Young black defendants receiving sentences 340% longer than white defendants for similar charges. Private prison contracts showing occupancy quotas tied to judicial performance reviews. Financial records revealing consulting fees paid to shell companies linked to the judge's family trust. Price's face remained stone still, but sweat beaded along his hairline. "This court will not be swayed by sensationalist reporting." "The United States calls James Morton," Lucien interrupted, standing. A suited man emerged from the gallery. The corrections consultant Malik had glimpsed through the door. Morton walked stiffly to the witness stand, followed by stares. "Mr. Morton," Lucien began, "please explain your role in discussions regarding facility occupancy rates." Morton glanced at Price, then at his own hands. I served as liaison between Greystone Correctional and Judicial Offices regarding population management. Population management? Lucien repeated. You mean filling beds? Yes, sir. We had quarterly quotas. When numbers dropped, we communicated concerns to partner judges and prosecutors. Partner judges like Halden Price? Objection! D.A. Kendra Voss shot to her feet, face flushed. This is beyond the scope. Overruled! Price snapped, too quickly. His control was slipping. Lucien held up a tablet. I'd like to present Exhibit C, surveillance footage recovered from cloud backup, showing the incident outside Franklin Grocery. The screen flickered to life on the courtroom's display system. The video was crystal clear. Malik stepping between the victim and attacker, arms raised in protection, not aggression. Deputy Bale arriving, ignoring Malik's attempts to explain. The timestamp matched perfectly with witness statements that had mysteriously changed. And now, Lucien continued, removing a sealed document from his briefcase, a federal grand jury indictment charging conspiracy against rights, obstruction of justice, and violation of oath of office. The room went absolutely still. Even the reporters stopped typing. Agents? Lucien nodded. 2 FBI agents moved forward, badges gleaming. Behind them, more agents appeared at each door. Judge Halden Price, the lead agent announced, voice cutting through silence. You are under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law. Price's face drained of color. His hands gripped the bench as if it might save him. This is unprecedented. You have the right to remain silent, the agent continued, producing handcuffs. A commotion erupted near the side door, D.A. Voss attempting to slip away. She made it 3 steps before federal marshals blocked her path, serving her with ethics violations and criminal conspiracy charges. Malik watched it unfold, barely breathing. Beside him, Tessa squeezed his shoulder. In the gallery, Evelyn sat straight-backed, eyes fixed on Price as agents led him down from his bench. No longer a judge, just a man in handcuffs. The same handcuffs he had placed on so many others, Malik thought. The same cold metal. The same harsh click of justice finally served. Through the windows, camera flashes strobed like lightning. Justice wasn't just words now. It wore handcuffs and walked in shame past the very benches where it had dealt so much cruelty. Afternoon sun blazed across the courthouse steps as bailiffs removed Malik's handcuffs for the last time. The metal clinked against itself, falling away like shed armor. Beside him, Evelyn's hand found his shoulder, steady and warm. Camera shutters clicked in rapid bursts, capturing the moment justice finally showed its face. A federal court order came down that afternoon. All charges dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could never be filed again. Her voice had carried through speakers to the crowd outside as she outlined systemic failures and ordered immediate federal oversight of Greystone Correctional. The facility's warden, she announced, was suspended pending a full investigation into civil rights violations and prisoner abuse. Now, on the steps, Malik watched Deputy Soren Bale being led out in handcuffs. That familiar smirk finally wiped from his face. 2 FBI agents guided him toward a waiting vehicle, reading charges. Evidence tampering, falsifying official reports, conspiracy against rights. Bale's shoulders slumped as cameras swung his way. No strutting now, no casual cruelty. Just another man learning consequences had teeth. Mr. Rowe? A federal marshal approached. Your personal effects are ready for collection. He handed Malik a clear plastic bag containing his original clothes, wallet, and phone, items that felt like artifacts from another life. Tessa Lang emerged from the courthouse doors, laptop tucked under her arm, smiling. The release papers are processed. You're officially free, Malik. She turned to Evelyn. And the civil settlement framework is already in motion. We'll have details within weeks." The crowd on the steps had grown. Church members from Evelyn's congregation stood holding signs. "Justice served, and power must answer." Neighbors who'd known Malik since childhood waved and called out. Even some courthouse staff watched from windows, witnessing a system's machinery grind in reverse. Lucien Cross descended the steps slowly, his security detail creating space. He stopped before Malik, and for a moment, father and son studied each other in the harsh afternoon light. "I had to wait," Lucien said quietly. "If I'd moved too soon, they would have buried evidence deeper, covered tracks better." He met Malik's eyes directly. "That doesn't make it right. You suffered while we built the case." Malik nodded, understanding strategy even as his wrists still ached from chains. "You needed them confident." "Sloppy." "Yes." Lucien glanced at the media crews setting up for live shots. "But this isn't just about headlines. My office will maintain oversight until real change is documented." The warrant covered 3 other facilities with similar patterns. A reporter shouted questions about Department of Justice involvement. Lucien raised a hand, not yet ready for official statements. He turned back to Malik and Evelyn. "There's a justice nonprofit called Second Signal. They sponsor technical training for people impacted by wrongful convictions. They've offered you a paid apprenticeship in audio engineering." He almost smiled. "Seems your skills with that speaker tap impressed some people." Malik felt something tight in his chest begin to unwind. Skills that had saved him could now build his future. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't thank me," Lucien replied. "You did this. You stayed steady when they tried to break you." Evelyn squeezed Malik's shoulder. "He comes from strong stock." More cars arrived, bringing journalists and community leaders. Malik spotted Marisol Vega setting up for a live broadcast, her exposé having sparked national attention. Nearby, Railen Finch's attorney spoke to reporters about his client's case being reopened, the transfer order already reversed. Tessa approached with a thick envelope. "The preliminary settlement details. The community legal clinic will be established in your neighborhood, Mrs. Rowe. Full funding for 5 years, with an endowment for continuation. And there's a trust to secure your home permanently." Evelyn accepted the envelope with dignity. This was never about money. "No," Tessa agreed. "But resources help ensure it doesn't happen again." The crowd continued to grow, not a silent vigil, but a proud gathering. Children sat on parents' shoulders. Elders brought folding chairs and coolers, settling in to witness Justice's slow wheels finally turn. Phones live-streamed every moment. Bail in custody, price being processed, Voss facing ethics boards, consequences unfolding in real time, unable to hide in procedural shadows. 3 weeks later, Malik stood in a small studio space provided by Second Signal. Warm afternoon light filtered through high windows, dancing across mixing boards and audio equipment. On his workbench sat one of Evelyn's old tube radios, its wooden case carefully restored, internal components getting similar attention. He adjusted the dial, fine-tuning until voices came through clear and strong. No static, no interference. Just truth, steady and undeniable, filling the room with its presence. The door opened quietly. Evelyn entered, bringing the scent of her famous lemon pound cake. She smiled at the radio. "Your daddy, your granddaddy, used to fix those. Had the same careful hands." Malik nodded, continuing his adjustments. Each component cleaned, each connection renewed, taking broken things and making them speak again. The radio's speaker hummed with life, broadcasting news about ongoing investigations, about changed policies, about systems facing their own reflection. The signal came in perfectly now, strong and unwavering, like truth, like justice, like a voice that refused to be silenced. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.